You do this thing where something painful comes up and you immediately turn it into a joke. Someone asks about your childhood and you've got a bit ready, a rehearsed line, something about how your parents really prepared you for disappointment, or how your family put the fun in dysfunction. You deliver it perfectly. Timing, tone, the little self-aware smile that says, I know exactly what I'm doing here. And the person laughs. They always laugh. Because you're good at this. You've been doing it your whole life. You're the one in the friend group who makes everyone crack up. The one people call when they need cheering up. The one who can find something funny in any situation, no matter how dark. You've been told you should do stand-up. You've been told you're the funniest person someone knows. And part of you loves hearing that. Part of you needs to hear that. But there's another part. The part that notices how quickly the joke comes out, almost before you've even finished feeling the thing you're joking about. The part that wonders whether you're laughing because something is genuinely funny, or because laughing is the only way you know how to hold something that heavy without dropping it. The part that suspects your sense of humor isn't just a personality trait, that it might be something you built, brick by brick, in a house where showing real emotion wasn't safe. If that sounds familiar, stay here, because what you do with humor, the way you use it, where you learned it, and what it might be costing you, is more complicated than anyone has probably told you. And the answer isn't to stop being funny. The answer is understanding why you had to be. There's a specific kind of exhaustion that comes with being the funny one. Not physical exhaustion, though there's that too. It's more like the tiredness of always being on, of scanning every room for the emotional temperature and knowing, instinctively, that your job is to regulate it, to keep things light, to diffuse tension before anyone else even notices it's building. You learned this somewhere, and you learned it young. Think about it for a second. When did you first realize that being funny kept you safe? Maybe it was at the dinner table when things were getting loud and you cracked a joke and your father's face softened. Maybe it was on the playground when the kid who was about to shove you decided you were entertaining enough to keep around. Maybe it was in your mother's car after a fight with your other parent and you said something absurd and she laughed instead of cried, and for just a moment you felt like you had fixed something, like you had a superpower. That wasn't nothing. That was real. That moment, whatever specific form it took for you, was the beginning of a strategy that genuinely worked. Humor became your way of surviving environments that were too loud, too volatile, too sad, too unpredictable, or just too much for a child who didn't have the tools to process any of it directly. And here's the thing that makes this so complicated. It actually is a good strategy. Psychologically speaking, humor is one of the healthiest defenses a person can develop. A psychiatrist named George Vaillant spent decades tracking the lives of hundreds of men as part of one of the longest-running studies in psychology. He followed them from their 20s into their 70s and 80s, watching how they coped with loss, failure, stress, and disappointment over the course of entire lifetimes. And he developed a hierarchy of defense mechanisms, 4 tiers ranging from the most primitive and distorting, things like denial and psychotic projection, all the way up to the most adaptive and reality-preserving. Humor landed at the very top, the highest tier, right alongside sublimation, altruism, and healthy suppression. Vaillant classified it as a mature defense, meaning it lets you acknowledge painful reality without being destroyed by it. Unlike denial, which pretends the pain doesn't exist, or intellectualization, which converts emotion into abstraction, humor says, yes, this is terrible, and also, here's something absurd about it. It holds both truths at the same time, and the data backed him up. The men who used mature defenses, including humor, showed better physical health in their 70s and 80s. They had better relationships. They adapted more successfully to the losses that come with aging. Humor wasn't just a coping mechanism. It was predictive of a longer, healthier life. But Vaillant found something else, something that matters here. He found that the bleaker the childhood, the stronger the association between mature defenses and adult mental health. In other words, the people who needed humor the most were also the people for whom it worked the best. If your early life was painful, developing a sophisticated sense of humor wasn't just charming, it was life-saving. So far, so good. Your humor works. It protects you. It might even be keeping you healthy. But there's a turn coming, and you probably feel it, because there's a difference between humor that helps you hold pain and humor that helps you hide from it. And the line between those two things is not always easy to see, especially from the inside. A psychologist named Rod Martin at the University of Western Ontario spent years trying to understand this difference. In 2003, he and his colleagues published research that changed how the field thinks about humor. They identified 4 distinct humor styles, and the differences between them explain a lot about why some funny people thrive, while others quietly fall apart. The first 2 styles are what Martin called adaptive. Affiliative humor is the kind you use to connect with people. Good-natured jokes, funny observations, the warmth of shared laughter. Self-enhancing humor is the kind you use to keep perspective during hard times, finding genuine absurdity in adversity, maintaining a light touch when things get heavy. Both of these styles correlate with lower depression, lower anxiety, stronger social bonds, and greater resilience. In a study of over 200 survivors of terror attacks, people who used these humor styles reported fewer trauma symptoms. Their laughter was genuinely helping them process what they'd been through. But the other 2 styles tell a different story. Aggressive humor, the kind that puts other people down, is damaging to relationships, but doesn't necessarily hurt the person using it. It's the 4th style that matters here. Self-defeating humor, the kind where you make yourself the punchline, where you volunteer your flaws, your failures, your pain as material for other people's entertainment. Self-defeating humor is the style that looks the most like a personality. It's charming, it's disarming. People love someone who can laugh at themselves. And on the surface, it looks like self-awareness, like confidence, like someone who's at peace with their imperfections. But Martin's research told a different story across 37 studies involving nearly 13,000 participants. Self-defeating humor showed a consistent, moderate, positive relationship with depression. It correlated with anxiety, with attachment insecurity, with lower self-esteem, and in some studies, with suicidal ideation. The researchers suggested something uncomfortable, that self-defeating humor may develop as an adaptive strategy in abusive or invalidating environments, Where, and these are close to their words, aligning with the aggressor by showing a low opinion of oneself may have been protective. In other words, if you learned early that the safest way to handle someone who might hurt you was to hurt yourself first, to beat them to the punchline, then self-deprecating humor isn't confidence. It's a preemptive strike dressed up as charm. And here's where it gets even more layered, because you can use both styles. You might be genuinely self-enhancing sometimes, finding real perspective and real lightness in dark moments. And you might be self-defeating other times, offering up your pain as entertainment because you don't know what else to do with it. The question isn't which one you are. The question is whether you can tell the difference in the moment. Think about how this plays out in your actual relationships. You're at dinner with someone you care about and they ask you something real. How are you doing since the breakup? How's your relationship with your dad these days? What happened in therapy this week? And the joke is there before the question mark has even landed. It's immediate, reflexive. You can feel it assembling itself in your mouth while the other person is still looking at you with genuine concern. And here's the specific cruelty of it. The joke works. They laugh. The moment of potential vulnerability passes. You both move on to something lighter. But something happened in that exchange that neither of you acknowledges. You asked for closeness, and I gave you a performance. You offered me a door, and I turned it into a window people can look through but not enter. Over time, this creates a specific kind of loneliness. You're surrounded by people who think they know you, who describe you as hilarious, as someone who's always up, always positive, always good for a laugh. But you know, quietly, that what they know is the act, that the person behind the performance hasn't been seen in years, maybe decades, maybe ever. And the truly painful part is that you're the one doing this to yourself. Nobody is telling you to be funny. Nobody is demanding that you perform. The people who love you would sit with your sadness if you let them, but your nervous system won't let them. It intercepts the vulnerability and converts it to entertainment before anyone, including you, has a chance to engage with it directly. There's a specific dynamic that shows up in romantic relationships. Your partner has seen you be funny about your childhood, about your anxiety, about the things that happened to you. And at first, they found it attractive. They thought it meant you'd process these things, that you had perspective, that you were easy to be with. But eventually, if the relationship gets deep enough, they start to notice the gap. They start to realize that every serious conversation gets rerouted through humor, that they've heard the jokes about your mother 100 times, but they've never seen you cry about her, that they laugh along because you make it easy to laugh along. But something about the laugh starts to feel hollow, like they're participating in an avoidance they didn't sign up for. Some partners push through. They say things like, "I don't need you to be funny right now." And that sentence, which is meant with love, can land like a threat. Because if you're not funny, what are you? If you put down the performance, what's left to offer? Some partners stop trying. They accept the surface version. They laugh at the jokes. They settle into the unspoken agreement that certain depths will never be reached. And the relationship works, in a way, but it works at a certain altitude, never descending into the territory where real intimacy lives. Both people know this. Neither says it. The joke fills the silence where truth should be. There's a theory that helps explain why trauma specifically becomes funny. A researcher named Peter McGraw at the University of Colorado developed what he called benign violation theory. And it works like this. Something is funny when three things happen at the same time. First, there's a violation, something that threatens or contradicts the way you think the world should work. Second, the violation is also somehow benign, meaning it feels safe or okay despite being wrong. And third, you perceive both of these things simultaneously. Trauma is a violation, obviously. Something happened that shouldn't have happened. But when you joke about it, you're doing something interesting. You're taking a genuine violation, real pain, real damage, and you're rendering it benign. You're putting enough distance between yourself and the event that your brain can hold it as both wrong and okay at the same time. And the collision of those two perceptions produces laughter. McGraw actually tested this empirically. He studied how people's reactions to Hurricane Sandy changed over time. Right after the hurricane, Sandy jokes weren't funny, too raw, too close. But as weeks passed, the jokes got funnier up to a point. And then, after enough time, they stopped being funny again. The violation had faded so completely that there was nothing left to collide with the benign interpretation. He called it the comedic sweet spot, a window where distance is large enough to create safety, but not so large that the violation disappears entirely. This is why you can joke about something from your childhood that you couldn't joke about 5 years ago, and why you can joke about something from 5 years ago that you couldn't joke about last month. Your brain is constantly recalibrating the distance, and humor is the signal that you've reached the sweet spot, the place where you can hold the violation and the safety at the same time. But here's the catch. Distance can be genuine, meaning you've actually processed the event and integrated it into your life story. Or distance can be manufactured, meaning you've built a wall between yourself and the emotion, and you're calling that wall a joke. From the outside, these look identical. From the inside, they feel very different. You know the difference. You felt it. There's the laugh that comes after you've actually sat with something painful and come out the other side. The laugh that feels like release. And then there's the laugh that comes instead of sitting with something painful, the one that arrives too fast, too smooth, like a reflex. The one where you can feel, even as you're delivering the punchline, that you're performing rather than processing. The second kind of laugh has a function too. It's not fake, exactly, but it's doing something more complicated than just expressing amusement. Let's talk about what happens in your body when you laugh at your own trauma, because your nervous system doesn't care whether a joke is self-enhancing or self-defeating. It responds to laughter the same way either way, at least initially. When you laugh, genuinely laugh, your brain releases endogenous opioids. Researchers at Oxford used PET imaging to confirm this, showing endorphin release in the thalamus, the caudate nucleus, and the anterior insula during social laughter. Robin Dunbar's research at the same university demonstrated that people can endure roughly 15% more pain after laughing for a few minutes. The mechanism has to do with the physical act itself. Those long exhale sequences that happen when you're really laughing cause your abdominal muscles to fatigue, which triggers endorphin release. It's like a tiny workout that your body rewards with its own painkillers, and it goes beyond endorphins. A meta-analysis across 8 interventional studies found that spontaneous laughter produces nearly a 32% reduction in cortisol, the primary stress hormone. Another study found that even anticipating laughter, just knowing something funny is coming, reduced cortisol by 39% and epinephrine by 70%. So your body is literally rewarding you for finding humor in pain. Reduce stress hormones, natural painkillers, dopamine activation in the reward centers. It feels good to laugh at what hurts. And that's not an illusion. The relief is real. But there's a distinction your nervous system is making that you might not be aware of. Stephen Porges' Polyvagal theory describes 3 states your autonomic nervous system can occupy. The ventral vagal state is the one associated with safety, connection, and social engagement. It's the state you're in when you feel calm and present and genuinely connected to the people around you. The sympathetic state is fight or flight, and the dorsal vagal state is shut down, freeze, collapse, dissociation. Genuine laughter, the kind that comes from real connection and real processing, activates the ventral vagal system. It involves your facial muscles, your voice through the vagally innervated larynx, and exhalation patterns that increase parasympathetic tone. Research confirms that hearing laughter significantly increases parasympathetic nervous activity. This is laughter as a regulation. It genuinely calms your system and brings you into connection. But defensive laughter, the kind that substitutes for feeling, can operate differently. It can look like ventral vagal engagement from the outside, while actually serving as a bridge away from difficult emotion. You're not connecting, you're deflecting. The laughter is pulling you out of a feeling that your nervous system has flagged as dangerous, and the joke is the escape route. And then there's a third category that's harder to talk about: dissociative laughter. The kind that happens when something is so overwhelming that your nervous system drops you out of feeling entirely. And what comes out is a laugh that doesn't match what's happening inside. You've probably experienced this. Laughing at a funeral. Laughing when someone tells you something terrible. Laughing and not knowing why. Your body is doing something with the activation that it can't process. And laughter is what comes out instead of crying or screaming or shutting down completely. Researchers at UC Berkeley studied this. Daché Keltner and George Bonanno examined bereaved adults and found that genuine laughter, the kind involving the muscles around the eyes that you can't fake, was associated with reduced self-reports of anger and increased enjoyment. But they also found something they called verbal autonomic dissociation, where the person's reported distress decreased even though their physiological stress response continued underneath. The body was still activated. The laughter was creating a gap between what the person felt and what they showed. This is the mechanism that makes trauma humor so effective and so potentially problematic. It creates genuine relief at the surface level while potentially leaving the deeper emotional content untouched. Your cortisol drops, your endorphins rise, you feel better. But the thing you're laughing about hasn't been processed, it's been performed. And there's something important about the physical relationship between laughter and crying that rarely gets talked about. Neurologically and physiologically, they're closer to each other than either is to any other emotional expression. Both involve rhythmic vocalization. Both involve loss of voluntary control. Both involve abdominal contractions and changes in breathing pattern. Both can be triggered by emotional overwhelm. You've experienced this directly. You've laughed until you cried. You've been crying and felt a laugh break through. You've been in that strange territory where you genuinely cannot tell which one your body is trying to do. This isn't a coincidence. Both responses are ways the autonomic nervous system discharges activation. When emotional arousal exceeds a certain threshold, the body needs to do something with the energy. Crying provides cathartic release that includes a specific cortisol discharge through tears, which is part of why crying can feel like pressure being released. Laughter provides endorphin release and parasympathetic activation, but without that same cortisol discharge. Both are valuable. Both are necessary, but they aren't interchangeable. When you consistently substitute laughter for crying, when the joke arrives every time the tears might, you're getting the dopamine and endorphin relief without the cathartic cortisol release. You feel better in the moment, but the emotional pressure that would have been discharged through tears remains in the system. It builds, it accumulates, and it finds other ways out, through insomnia, through irritability that seems to come from nowhere, through a general sense of emotional flatness that exists underneath the entertaining surface, through a body that carries tension it can't explain and pain that doesn't correspond to any injury. You might notice this as the feeling of being tired in a way that sleep doesn't fix, or as the strange experience of being genuinely funny in public and then going home and feeling absolutely nothing. Not sad, not happy, just empty. The performance took everything and left nothing for the private version of you, the person nobody sees. This is your body telling you something, not that humor is wrong, not that you need to stop laughing, but that you also need the other release, the one you've been avoiding, the one that doesn't earn applause. And if you're honest with yourself, you might recognize that you're not even sure you can cry anymore. Not really. Not the way you could when you were small, before you learned to convert everything into material. You might find that when something genuinely painful happens, something that would make anyone else fall apart, what you feel is a flicker of sadness followed immediately by the joke. The sadness never gets a chance to fully arrive. It gets intercepted, converted, exported as entertainment. And over time, that interception becomes so automatic that you begin to wonder if you even feel sadness anymore, or if you've just gotten so good at rerouting it that you've lost access to the original signal. This is what therapists sometimes call emotional blunting. The defense doesn't just prevent the negative emotion from being expressed, it prevents it from being felt. And the cruel irony is that emotional blunting doesn't selectively target pain. When you dampen your access to grief, you dampen your access to joy too, to awe, to tenderness, to the full range of human experience that exists beyond the narrow band of funny and fine. You end up living in a kind of emotional middle register, entertaining on the surface, numb underneath, wondering why nothing feels as vivid as it should. Some people discover this when something good happens, a promotion, a new relationship, a moment that should land as happiness, and instead It lands as the setup for a joke about how it'll probably go wrong. The humor that was supposed to protect you from pain has started protecting you from everything. And that's the moment where the cost becomes visible, where you realize the defense mechanism isn't defending you anymore. It's containing you. And this is where the funniest person in the friend group starts to make more sense. Because when you've spent a lifetime turning pain into material, you develop a specific skill set. You can read a room instantly. You know exactly when to deploy humor to shift the emotional tone. You can take the heaviest thing in the conversation and make it weightless. People love this about you. They gravitate toward it. They need it. And they need it in a way that creates its own kind of trap. Because once you become the funny one, you're carrying a role. The group has assigned you a function, often without anyone realizing it. You're the one who keeps things light, the one who breaks tension, the emotional regulator for an entire social circle. And roles have gravity. They're hard to step out of even when you want to, because the group has organized itself around your position, and changing your behavior means disrupting the system. You've noticed this. The one time you weren't funny, the time you actually showed up sad or quiet or withdrawn, someone asked, "What's wrong with you tonight?" Not what's wrong, but what's wrong with you. As if the real version of your emotional state is the aberration and the performance is the norm. And maybe you made a joke about it, said something self-deprecating about being off your game, and the room relaxed because the funny one was back. The system restored itself, and you were reminded, subtly but clearly, what your function is. This is a form of what family therapist Murray Bowen called emotional fusion. The group or family system treats individual members as extensions of its own needs, rather than as separate people with their own internal experiences. Your humor isn't just yours, it belongs to the group. And depriving the group of it feels like a betrayal, both to them and to yourself, because the group's approval has been the primary way you felt safe and connected for as long as you can remember. But here's what they don't see: the speed at which the joke arrives, how it's there before you've even finished registering the emotion underneath, how sometimes you're laughing and you can feel somewhere behind the performance something that isn't laughing at all, something that might be grief or rage or a loneliness so old you don't even have language for it anymore. Something that the group has never met and might not know how to hold. Not because they're bad people, but because you've never given them the chance. The psychological term for not having a language for your emotions is alexithymia. It comes from the Greek, literally meaning no words for feelings. And it shows up in trauma populations at staggering rates. In the general population, somewhere between 10 and 26% of people have significant alexithymic traits. In PTSD populations, that number climbs as high as 85%. One study in Mexico found 90% of PTSD patients scoring above the clinical cutoff. When you can't identify or describe what you're feeling, humor becomes the only available channel. You can't say, "I'm terrified," or "I'm devastated," or "I don't know how to hold this," so you say something funny instead. And the funny thing works. It communicates something real. Even if it's wrapped in irony, people laugh. And in that laughter, there's a moment of connection, of being seen, even if what's being seen is a carefully constructed version of the truth. This connects to something deeper, something that started before you could talk. Attachment researchers have found consistent links between humor style and the way you learn to connect with caregivers as an infant. A study of over 600 adults in Italy found that dismissive avoidant attachment, the style that develops when a child learns their emotional needs won't be met and stops expecting them to be, positively associates with sarcasm and what researchers call nonsense humor. Sarcasm creates psychological distance. Nonsense humor lets you play with ideas without actually engaging with people on an emotional level. Both serve the same function. They let you be in a social space without being emotionally available in that space. If you grew up avoidantly attached, you learned, possibly as early as 12 months old, that reaching for comfort gets you nothing. Or worse, it gets you rejection. So you stopped reaching. But the need didn't go away. It just went underground, and humor became the compromise. A way to be close to people without being close. A way to seem open while keeping the door firmly shut. Anxious attachment tells a different story, but arrives at a similar place. If you grew up never knowing whether your caregiver would be available, you may have developed a heightened need for approval, combined with a deep fear of rejection. Self-deprecating humor serves both masters. It gets people to like you because you're funny and disarming. And it preemptively manages rejection by beating everyone to the criticism. If you mock yourself first, nobody else can blindside you with it. The research is direct about this. Self-defeating humor is strongly associated with insecure attachment styles and damaged self-esteem. Deep inside, avoidantly attached adults feel a natural longing to feel close to others, but have internalized that this longing is unhelpful, wrong, or weak. The joke is the armor, and the armor works until it doesn't. There is an entire tradition of research on people who made humor their profession, and what that research reveals is uncomfortable. In 2014, Gordon Claridge and Victoria Ando at Oxford published a study in the British Journal of Psychiatry that examined 523 comedians from the United Kingdom, the United States, and Australia, comparing them against 364 actors and 831 general population controls. They measured psychotic personality traits, not psychosis itself, but the subclinical traits that exist on a spectrum in all of us. Comedians scored significantly higher on all 4 trait dimensions. Unusual experiences, things like magical thinking and belief in telepathy. Cognitive disorganization. Introvertive anhedonia, meaning reduced ability to feel pleasure from social and physical contact. And impulsive nonconformity. What made comedians unique and different from actors who also scored high on some of these traits was a specific combination. They showed high introvertive anhedonia, which typically associates with the schizophrenic end of the psychosis spectrum, and simultaneously high extroverted impulsiveness, which typically associates with the manic end. This combination didn't appear in any other group. Claridge noted that the creative elements needed to produce humor are strikingly similar to those characterizing the cognitive style of people with psychosis, both involving the ability to connect distant or loosely associated ideas. An earlier study from 1975 by Samuel Janus found that professional comedians were, in his words, angry, suspicious, and depressed, 80% had been involved in psychotherapy. Their childhoods were marked by isolation, suffering, and deprivation. 85% came from lower-class homes. Comedy, Janus concluded, served as a defense mechanism against panic and anxiety, accompanied by what he called an inescapable sense of depression. Fisher and Fisher found in 1981 that comedians were more likely than actors to regard themselves as unworthy and made significantly more self-deprecating remarks. This is the sad clown paradox. The person who makes everyone laugh is often the one who is hurting the most, and the craft itself can make healing harder because the skill that earns approval, that pays the bills, that forms the entire basis of professional identity is the same skill that prevents direct emotional engagement. Hannah Gadsby articulated this when she described her comedy as half-told stories, where the traumatic endings were left out to serve punchlines. The joke gets the laugh, but the story never gets finished. And there's something about the performance itself that mirrors a mild dissociative process. Researchers who studied conservatory acting students found they scored significantly higher than the general population on the dissociative experiences scale, driven specifically by what the researchers called absorption and imaginative involvement. They described it as controlled, creative dissociation, the intentional stepping into another identity. For comedians, this looks like stepping into the comedy persona, the version of you that can tell the story about your worst moments with perfect timing and detachment. You're there and not there simultaneously, present enough to perform, absent enough to not feel the full weight of what you're performing. This creates a cycle that feeds itself. Childhood trauma creates a need for control and validation. Comedy meets both needs. You control the room's emotional temperature, and you receive validation in the form of laughter and applause. But the performance requires a degree of emotional distance from the material, which means the original pain stays unprocessed. And because the pain stays unprocessed, you keep needing the performance to manage it. The audience's laughter becomes a form of emotional regulation that you can't access on your own. Take away the audience, and you're alone with the exile, the unedited version, the pain without the punchline. And that's unbearable. So you keep performing. You don't have to be a professional comedian to recognize this cycle. You're running a smaller version of it every day. The friend group is your audience. The group chat is your stage. The dinner party, the family gathering, the work meeting where you lighten the mood. Every space becomes a venue, and every interaction becomes a set. And the applause, the laughter, the "you're so funny" keeps the whole system running. And here's where this leaves the body. Because your body has been keeping track of everything your jokes have been avoiding. Bessel van der Kolk's research on trauma and the body established something that talk therapy and humor both struggle with. Talking about trauma doesn't automatically put it behind you, because talking goes to the part of the brain that handles language and narrative. But trauma is often imprinted in the parts of the brain that handle sensation, emotion, and automatic response. The amygdala doesn't care about your punchline. It cares about the sensory details, the smells, the tones of voice, the physical sensations that were present during the original experience, so you can joke about what happened and receive genuine relief, cortisol dropping, endorphins releasing, dopamine firing. while the deeper imprint remains completely untouched. Your prefrontal cortex is enjoying the joke. Your amygdala is still on alert, and your body is holding the unfinished story in muscle tension, in shallow breathing, in a jaw that clenches at night, in a stomach that tightens in situations that echo the original wound, even though you can't consciously make the connection. Pete Walker's framework for complex PTSD identifies 4 trauma responses: fight, flight, freeze, and fawn. The fawn response is particularly relevant here because it involves trying to please, to be useful, to be entertaining enough that the threatening person decides to keep you around rather than hurt you. If your humor has a fawn quality to it, if you find yourself performing for people who frighten you, charming your way through situations where you feel powerless, making the dangerous person laugh so they'll be gentle with you, then your humor isn't just a defense mechanism. It's a survival strategy rooted in an old fear. And the freeze response connects too. Walker describes the freeze type as someone who retreats into intellectualization, who obsesses about safe, abstract concerns, quite removed from deeper issues. Humor can be a form of intellectualization. You're taking raw emotional material and converting it into a cognitive product, a joke, a bit, a funny observation. The intellectual processing is real, but the emotional processing isn't happening. You're thinking about your pain instead of feeling it, and thinking about it feels a lot safer. There's another layer here that's hard to look at directly, which is that your humor might be a way of controlling how other people respond to your pain. When you tell the joke, you control the reaction. You get laughter, which is predictable and safe. If you told the truth instead, the raw version without the comedic packaging, you'd be at the mercy of however the other person responds. They might cry. They might go silent. They might say the wrong thing. They might look at you with pity, which for some people feels worse than being ignored entirely. The joke is a container. It holds the painful content in a shape that's manageable, both for you and for the person hearing it. And containers aren't bad. We all need them. But a container that never opens eventually becomes a prison. This dynamic plays out in therapy offices constantly. Therapists who work with people who use humor defensively describe a specific kind of session. The client is charming, engaging, quick-witted. They make the therapist laugh. The hour feels productive because so much is being said. But afterwards, the therapist realizes that nothing was actually felt. The humor kept everything at arm's length. It was an extremely entertaining avoidance strategy. One clinical approach involves what therapists call tracking the incongruity. The client says something devastating and laughs. The therapist, instead of laughing along, names what's happening. Something like, "You're laughing, but I notice I'm feeling something heavy in what you just said." Or, "That was really funny, and also, can we stay with the thing underneath it for a second?" This isn't about taking away the humor. It's about creating enough space for whatever the humor is sitting on top of. Research on this approach found something interesting. When a therapist gently challenges defensive humor, when they call it out with warmth rather than criticism, clients often report feeling more seen, not less, because being called out on your defense means someone is paying close enough attention to notice the gap between what you're performing and what you're feeling. And for someone who spent a lifetime managing other people's emotions through comedy, being truly noticed might be the thing they've been performing toward all along. But there's a cruel paradox here. The moment someone sees through the joke and invites you to be real, your nervous system may interpret that invitation as a threat, because being real means being vulnerable, and being vulnerable means giving up control. And giving up control means trusting that the other person can hold what you're holding, which is exactly the thing your childhood taught you not to trust. Carl Rogers called this conditions of worth. The internalized belief that you're only acceptable when you're performing certain behaviors. If you learned that being funny earned you love and being sad earned you neglect or punishment, then the condition of your worth is your humor. Take away the jokes and what's left? Just a person with pain and no act to hide it behind. And if the only version of you that was ever accepted was the funny version, then dropping the act feels like annihilation. You might intellectually know that the people in your life now aren't the people who created these conditions. Your partner isn't your father. Your best friend isn't the schoolyard bully. Your therapist isn't the parent who rolled their eyes when you cried. But conditions of worth don't operate at the intellectual level. They live in the body, in the automatic responses that fire before conscious thought has a chance to intervene. They live in the tightening of your chest when a conversation gets serious, in the way your voice changes pitch when you're about to deflect with humor, in the slight performance smile that you wear so often you've forgotten what your real face looks like underneath it. Rogers believed that healing comes through what he called unconditional positive regard, being received by another person without conditions, without needing to earn their warmth through performance. But here's the paradox. For someone whose entire relational strategy is built on earning regard through humor, unconditional acceptance feels wrong. It feels suspicious. If someone likes you without the jokes, your system interprets that as either a mistake on their part, naivety that will eventually correct itself, or a setup for future disappointment when they realize the real you isn't entertaining enough to keep around. So you keep performing, even in the safest rooms, even with the safest people, not because you want to, but because the alternative, being seen without the filter, feels like standing naked in a room where you've only ever been clothed. This is why you can't just decide to stop using humor as a defense. It's not a bad habit, it's a survival identity. And survival identities don't get replaced through insight alone. You can understand everything in this video, nod along to every sentence, and still crack a joke the next time someone gets too close to something real. Because understanding happens in the prefrontal cortex, and your humor reflex lives somewhere much older and much faster. Richard Schwartz's internal family systems model offers a useful way to think about this. In IFS, the psyche isn't a single unit, but a collection of parts, each with its own role and its own motivation. The part of you that makes jokes is what Schwartz would call a protector, specifically a manager. It shows up preemptively. It prevents you from ever entering vulnerable territory. Its job isn't to process pain. Its job is to make sure you never have to. But underneath the protector is the part being protected, the exile, the younger version of you that holds the original pain, the sadness, the fear, the grief that was too much to feel when it happened. The protector learned that this exile needs to stay hidden, because when the exile was visible, when the child cried or raged or needed comfort, bad things happened. So the protector, your humor, formed a wall around the exile and has been standing guard ever since. The problem is that the protector doesn't know the environment has changed. It's still operating as if you're in the original unsafe situation. It can't tell the difference between the parent who punished vulnerability and the therapist who's inviting it, between the childhood dining table and the adult relationship. All it knows is its job. Keep the exile hidden. Make them laugh. Stay safe. And this is why insight alone doesn't resolve anything. You can't reason with a part of your nervous system that predates language. You can't logic your way into feeling safe when your body has decades of evidence that feeling things is dangerous. But you can gradually give the protector new evidence. You can create what therapists call corrective emotional experiences, moments where vulnerability happens and nothing terrible follows, where the exile peeks out and is met with warmth instead of punishment, where you say the real thing without the comedic wrapper, and the person across from you doesn't flinch, doesn't leave, doesn't mock, doesn't collapse. These moments are small and they don't fix everything at once. Peter Levine calls this titration, processing difficult material a little bit at a time, slowly, rather than flooding the system with more than it can handle. You don't have to go from performing your pain to dissolving into it. There's a middle ground, a place where you can tell the joke and also feel the ache underneath it, where you can be funny and also sometimes just be sad without needing to dress the sadness up in anything. This is where it's important to talk about what's different from what might seem like a similar topic. Because what we're discussing here isn't just about humor. It's about the particular way that an entire generation has started relating to their trauma through comedy, and whether that's helping or hurting. If you spend time on social media, you've seen it. The TikTok where someone describes their PTSD symptoms over a trending sound and it has 2 million likes. The tweet that says, "Me dissociating in the grocery store," and it's a picture of a cartoon character staring blankly. The meme that reads, "My therapist just diagnosed me with attachment issues, and I said, which one of us is leaving first?" Thousands of shares. Thousands of comments saying me, "Oh, I feel so seen." There's a specific experience that happens when you scroll through this kind of content. You see the meme about your exact issue, the specific flavor of your dysfunction, and you feel a rush of recognition. Someone else knows. Someone else has the same broken wiring you have. And you laugh, and you share it with a friend. And for a moment, the isolation lifts. Your pain has been witnessed, even if the witness is a stranger's meme account with an avatar of a crying cartoon frog. And sometimes that's enough. Sometimes the recognition is the medicine. But sometimes you notice something else. You share the meme, and the friend sends a laughing emoji, and you both move on. And nothing changed. The meme named the wound, but it didn't treat it. It held a mirror up to the pain and then scrolled away. And you're left in the same place you started, except now the pain has been labeled with a vocabulary of irony that makes it even harder to take seriously when it shows up again in a therapy session or a late-night conversation. Research on this phenomenon is genuinely mixed. A study analyzing trauma content on TikTok found that nearly half of all trauma-related videos were humorous. A study at Sheffield Hallam University found that people with depression perceived depression memes as funnier, more relatable, and more shareable than non-depressed people did. And nearly half of college students surveyed said they engaged with mental health memes specifically to alleviate psychiatric symptoms. Research during the pandemic found that viewing as few as 3 memes helped people cope with stress and increase positive emotions. So there's something real happening, something communal and valuable. One participant in a study of people with depression and bipolar disorder described it this way. One of the most distressing symptoms, they said, is isolation. When depression acts up, you start to think that no one understands. Dark humor memes give a sense of recognition and belonging. That's not nothing. That's the fundamental human need for connection being met, even if the medium is a screenshot with impact font. But the research also raises concerns. A separate study found that exposure to depression memes can actually increase depressive mood in people who already struggle with emotion regulation. Another found that acute exposure to mental health memes may increase sensitivity toward anxiety and suicidal ideation. And a study at Ohio State found that tweets portraying mental health as fixed and unchangeable, which is how much of the humor frames it, were perceived as funnier and more shareable, but had the potential to discourage help-seeking. There's a difference between "I feel seen" and "I feel stuck." Between "this is so me" as recognition and "this is so me" as resignation. Between humor that says "I'm not alone in this" and humor that says "this is just how I am and it's never going to change." The communal dimension is genuine and worth protecting, but the algorithmic dimension, where platforms amplify the most engaging content and engagement often correlates with emotional intensity, creates a feedback loop where the joke gets bigger while the pain underneath it stays the same. This isn't new, though. Using humor to survive collective trauma is one of the oldest human traditions. Jewish humor, developed over 3,000 years of persecution, was described by one researcher as neutralizing hostility by internalizing it and then detonating it through a joke. The tradition is so central to comedy that in the mid-1970s, an estimated 80% of comedy writers were Jewish. Shia Ostrower documented humor among Holocaust survivors in ghettos and concentration camps, describing it as a form of rebellion against reality, the weapon of those whose lives were utterly in the hands of the executioners, those who were powerless to rebel or resist in any other way. Black American humor, analyzed by Glenda Carpio, emerged as what she called wrested freedom, the freedom to laugh at that which was unjust and cruel in order to create distance from what would otherwise obliterate a sense of self and community. During slavery, people created tales criticizing slaveholders disguised as animal stories, mastering what scholars call playing the fool as subversive resistance. Irish humor grew from centuries of colonization, famine, and poverty. Jonathan Swift's 1729 essay, in which he satirically suggested selling children as food during a famine, remains one of the greatest examples of sustained irony in English literature. Academic analysis consistently notes that Irish humor is often tinged with satire, irony, or resentment, serving as a means to escape from dark realities. In all of these traditions, humor isn't trivial. It's existential. It's a collective survival strategy developed by communities under pressure so intense that direct expression of grief would have been either dangerous or unbearable. And it works. It preserves dignity. It maintains bonds. It says we are still here and we refuse to be destroyed by this. But even within these traditions, there's an awareness that humor can become a trap, that it can keep pain at a distance forever if you let it, that there's a difference between the joke that carries you through the night and the joke that replaces every night with performance. So what do you do with all of this? If your humor is both the thing that saved you and the thing that's keeping you from something deeper, the first thing is recognizing that you don't have to choose. This isn't a binary between being funny and being healed. You can be both. You can keep your humor and also develop the capacity to put it down when something real needs to be felt. The goal isn't to become someone who never laughs at their own pain. The goal is to become someone who also sometimes just feels the pain without needing to convert it into anything else. Kristin Neff's research on self-compassion is relevant here because it draws a line between two things that look similar from the outside: laughing with yourself about your pain, which involves compassionate acknowledgement of your flaws while maintaining self-esteem and genuine connection through shared experience, and laughing at yourself to avoid feeling, which involves reinforcing negative self-perceptions, masking genuine pain, and preemptively deflecting expected criticism. The first is self-compassion in action. The second is self-attack wearing a costume. Self-compassion involves three elements: self-kindness, treating yourself with the warmth you'd offer a friend; common humanity, recognizing that suffering is shared rather than isolating; and mindfulness, being present with your feelings rather than over-identifying with them or running away. Notice how good humor can serve all three of these. A kind joke about your own struggles can be self-kindness. Sharing a funny story about a universal human experience can be common humanity. Laughing about something with perspective and acceptance can be mindfulness. Humor and self-compassion aren't enemies. They can work together. But self-defeating humor violates all three. It replaces kindness with cruelty, connection with performance, and presence with avoidance. It looks like self-awareness, but it functions as self-harm. And your body knows the difference, even if your audience doesn't. Self-compassion activates the parasympathetic nervous system, the one associated with safety and rest. Self-attack activates the threat system, cortisol rising, muscles tensing. The same stress response that the laughter is supposed to be relieving. So a self-defeating joke puts you in the paradoxical position of increasing your stress while appearing to manage it. Noticing which one you're doing in real time is hard, but there are tells. Self-compassionate humor tends to feel warm afterward. You told the joke and you feel lighter, genuinely lighter, not performed lighter. Self-defeating humor tends to leave a residue, a slight hollowness, a sense that you gave something away, that you traded a piece of your dignity for someone else's laugh. If you pay attention to that residue, it can become a signal. Not a signal to stop being funny, but a signal to check in with what's underneath. The therapy angle matters here, because for a lot of people who use humor defensively, the idea of sitting in a room and talking seriously about their feelings sounds approximately as appealing as dental surgery without anesthesia. And that's fair. If your entire coping structure is built around avoiding direct emotional contact, then a setting designed specifically for direct emotional contact is going to feel threatening. But good therapists know this. They're not going to ask you to stop being funny. The best ones will laugh with you. And then, at some point, they'll say something like, "That was really funny. And I also noticed your voice changed when you said it." Or, "You joke about this a lot. Can you tell me what it feels like when you don't make it funny?" That question, "What does it feel like when you don't make it funny?" is the question your humor has been keeping you from answering. And the answer might be, "I don't know," which is also fine, because "I don't know" is more honest than any punchline you've ever delivered. And honesty, even confused honesty, is the beginning of something your nervous system hasn't tried. Van der Kolk's work suggests that processing trauma requires physical experiences that contradict helplessness and passivity. This means movement, breath work, body-based practices, things that let the body complete the responses it never got to complete during the original experience. Humor alone can't do this because it operates primarily in the cognitive and social domains, while the trauma imprint lives in the body. But humor combined with embodied work, humor used alongside rather than instead of direct emotional processing, can be part of a larger healing practice. Levine's concept of pendulation is useful here. Healing doesn't mean staying in pain all the time. It means developing the capacity to move between activation and settling, between difficulty and ease, between the weight and the lightness. Your humor already gives you the lightness. What you're developing is the capacity to sit with the weight too, and to trust that you can return to the lightness when you need to without getting trapped in it. And this isn't something you have to do alone. In fact, you probably can't do it alone, because the original wound happened in relationship, and the healing usually needs to happen in relationship too. Not necessarily romantic relationship. Any relationship where someone is willing to sit with you in the unperformed version of your experience. A therapist, a friend who can handle silence, a sibling who's in the same house and knows that the jokes you both tell are covering something neither of you has said out loud. The IFS model that Richard Schwartz developed offers a specific practice here. You can actually talk to the protector part, the one that generates the humor. Not to argue with it or shut it down, but to understand what it's afraid of. What does it think will happen if the joke doesn't come? What is it protecting you from? And when it tells you, usually through body sensation rather than words, you might find that what it's protecting you from is a very old fear that hasn't been updated, a fear of punishment that belongs to a 7-year-old in a household that no longer exists, a fear of abandonment that belongs to a child whose parents are no longer the primary figures in your emotional world. When you understand what the protector fears, you can start to offer it new evidence, slowly. Not by forcing vulnerability on yourself, which is just another form of violence, but by allowing small openings. Saying, "I'm actually not doing great," when someone asks, without adding the comedic qualifier. Letting a pause exist after someone says something kind to you, instead of filling it with deflection, staying in the feeling for 10 seconds before the joke takes over. Not because the joke is wrong, but because the feeling deserves its 10 seconds too. Gay Hendricks calls this kind of moment an upper limit problem. His research suggests that each of us has an internal thermostat for how much positive experience, including genuine intimacy and authentic connection, will allow ourselves before we unconsciously sabotage it. Humor can be the sabotage mechanism. Someone gets close, really close, to the real you, and the joke fires. Not because you don't want the closeness, but because the closeness exceeds what your system believes it deserves, and the joke brings you back to the familiar distance. Noticing this pattern is the beginning of changing it, not fixing it, not overcoming it, just noticing it. Oh, there I go. There's the joke, right on cue. There's the thing I do when someone gets close. That noticing, without judgment, without trying to force a different response, is what Dan Siegel calls mindsight. Awareness of your own mental processes. An awareness, even without action, begins to change the system. Because a defense mechanism that operates unconsciously is a prison. A defense mechanism that you can observe and name is a choice. There's something about the nervous system that's worth sitting with as we come toward the end of this. Your nervous system was tuned by your early experiences. If those experiences taught you that emotions were dangerous, that vulnerability led to punishment or abandonment, that the only version of you that was welcome was the funny one, then your system developed accordingly. It learned to intercept emotion and convert it to performance before it could reach the surface. That's not a flaw. That's an adaptation, a sophisticated, creative, intelligent adaptation that kept you alive and connected in an environment that didn't offer safer options. You should know that, not as a consolation prize, but as a genuine recognition of what you built. But adaptations designed for survival can outlive their usefulness. The humor that protected you at 7 still fires at 37, even though the environment has changed. The joke that kept your father from getting angry still shows up with your partner, who isn't angry and isn't going to be. The performance that earned love from your mother still runs with friends who would love you even if you sat in silence. Your protector doesn't know this yet. It's still guarding the exile. It's still doing its job. The work isn't firing the protector, it's thanking it. And then, slowly, showing it that the rules have changed, that there are people in your life now who can hold the unedited version. That silence won't be punished. That sadness won't be met with rejection. That you can be unfunny for a moment and still be wanted. Your nervous system won't believe this the first time, or the second, maybe not the 10th. It has years, decades of evidence supporting the old rules. Building new evidence takes time, and it takes repetition, and it takes the willingness to risk small moments of vulnerability without the safety net of a punchline. But neuroplasticity is real. Your nervous system can learn new patterns. The ventral vagal state, the one associated with safety and genuine connection, can become more accessible even to a system that spent a lifetime avoiding it. Every corrective experience, every moment where vulnerability leads to warmth instead of harm, every time you say the real thing and the other person stays, your system updates. Not all at once, but it updates. You might try something small. The next time someone asks how you are, and you feel the joke loading, the automatic "I'm great" or "I'm a disaster" delivered with perfect timing. Pause, just for a second, and see what's actually there. You don't have to share it. You don't have to perform it. You don't even have to name it. Just notice it. The thing between the question and the punchline. The thing the joke is there to cover. That space, the one between the question and the joke, is where you actually live. And maybe, just maybe, you can stay there a beat longer than usual. Not forever. Not even for a long time. Just long enough to feel whatever's there before the performance takes over. You'll still be funny. You might even be funnier, because humor that comes from genuine engagement with life, from having actually felt the hard things and choosing to laugh anyway, lands differently than humor that comes from avoidance. It has weight to it. It has truth in it. People can feel the difference, even if they can't name it. It's the difference between the comedian who makes you laugh and the comedian who makes you laugh and then think about it for days. Your humor saved you. And now, maybe, you can save the parts of you that your humor has been hiding. Not by becoming serious, not by becoming someone who analyzes every joke for its psychological origin, but by becoming someone who can do both, who can tell the joke, and also, when the room is quiet and safe and the right person is sitting across from you, say the thing the joke was built to protect. The laugh and the ache live in the same place. They always have. You just might be ready to let them both out at the same time.